Alright, hi there. So today's a little bit different. I wanted to talk about something that I have experience with, that I know a lot about, I'm very intimately familiar with, and that I haven't seen very many articles or videos on. Just thinking about history here. Tumblr 101. And I wanted to talk about black and white Tumblr, also sometimes known as soft grunge, pale grunge. I don't like that term as much because I don't really think it has that much in common with grunge at all. It doesn't really make any sense. So just black and white Tumblr is fine. I have my notes here. I wrote out a whole fucking essay, guys. So let's talk about Tumblr. It still exists, regardless of what people say about it. It still exists. I still use it all the time. But if you search Tumblr peak years on Google, what you'll get is 2011 through 2014, which makes sense. I was there during, I think I joined in 2012, so that makes sense. That being said, I don't personally believe Tumblr hit its cultural peak until probably like 2013, which is what I'm talking about here. Because when you think about like what Tumblr aesthetics are, this is what you're thinking about. Not some of the more like MySpace-y stuff that happened in like 2011 where it's like really colorful. You're still kind of in like scene aesthetics, like you've got like the hair, you've got like the mustache shit, like it's just not cool in the way that the black and white stuff was cool. Late 2012 I think was when things started to change quite a bit, which is about slightly after I joined. Tumblr began to like actually carve out an aesthetic that was its own and not stuff that was just found in like a random, like, what are they called? Fuego? Does anybody else have Fuego? And it was definitely also distinctly different from some of the like influencer Instagram stuff that happened slightly later, because Instagram didn't really become popular until like later that year. It is certainly distinct, and I'm gonna get to what that vibe actually is. It was, don't get me wrong, just as like white, skinny, conventionally attractive as the trends on either of those other sites, but it was also a lot edgier, a lot darker, and also a lot less concerned with actually showing you as a person as compared to showing what media you were interested in, which is quite different and pretty interesting, honestly. I think that really sets Tumblr apart from pretty much any other website in general. This was not a movement about being personally hot, it was about showing hot people to others. It's how many pictures of like Kaya Scodelario or Maddie Healy you could reblog at one time, and I think that's great. All about the notes, baby, not about being hot. I mentioned it before, but what is black and white Tumblr? What started it? Who was there? So there's multiple elements that make up what this was, and I'm gonna list them right now, and then we're gonna go through all of it. Blurry quotes, such as, "How do I make the emptiness go away?" Or, "Damaged people are dangerous. They know they can survive." The vinyl resurgence. If you had AM on vinyl, which I do, still in the other room, then you won. A lot of nature, like daisies, pine trees, which makes sense because I think most people that were involved were either in the US or the UK, and those are both obviously native to those countries. Smoking, drinking, drugs, neon science, though this wouldn't really like become super popular until later, it was definitely still there. Music, specifically connected to popular British alt-rock like Arctic Monkeys, The Vaccines, the 1975, but some other English-speaking artists like Vampire Weekend, Lorde, Lana Del Rey, Sky Ferreira, and The Neighborhood, they slipped through as well. Did I mention blurriness? So many blurry photos. Fashion, like Doc Martens, black skinny jeans, leather jackets, black and white tennis skirts, knee socks, winged eyeliner. Almost always worn by skinny white girls, but we'll get to that. Gifs. Gifs of TV shows like Skins, The Hills, Gossip Girl. Particularly from music videos though, most popularly Robbers by the 1975, or Do I Want to Know by the Arctic Monkeys. And lastly, an attitude of general anger and apathy regarding parents, school, interpersonal conflict, and life prospects. So, let's break all these things down. Quotes. So you probably noticed right away that like all of this seems pretty reliant on what sort of media you're consuming, be that music, TV, whatever. Like any good Tumblr trend, that's what it was about. The quotes that I mentioned before I think are actually both attributed to TV shows. The first one, I'm not sure. Second one is definitely Skins. Sometimes there were random quotes that people would make up and then attribute to random hot guys. But it's important to look at where the trend came from to understand the quotes. It's certainly debatable, but this is my video, so I'm gonna say what I think. But aesthetically, I think the trend starts with the 1975. So their first EP, Face Down, came out in August 2012, right before this trend really started to take shape, I guess. I joined Tumblr in September 2012, and it was just starting to happen at this time. First of all, the EP, if we look at the cover, It's black and white, obviously. Second, a lot of the photos you'll see in this trend have like a box element, where like the quote is in the middle of the box, or maybe a person is in a box and then the rest of it is blurry or something. But you can see that here, and that directly relates to 1975. Like, I don't know where else that would have come from. Thirdly, the photo behind the logo is completely fucking blurry. You can't even tell what the fuck it is. So all the elements are there. The lyrics on the record, even though it's only 4 songs, heavy on drugs, sex, introspection, all themes that were played with in this trend. Second thing I'm gonna point to is Skins, which Skins was actually on its way out by 2013. I think it was in its final season, but it was still a huge hit in the UK at the time, and obviously before that. And it's still talked about today, like, pretty often by people in their 20s, just as like something that was a cultural touchstone that was really impactful for them in their teens, which is obviously when this would have been. It also hit Netflix around that time, so people in America probably would have been, correct me if I'm wrong, discovering Skins for the first time. I know I was, but it explicitly like depicted drug use, sex, crime, parties, all like with people in like the 17 to 18-year-old range. So definitely edgy, I guess, but it was fun, and it was pretty focused on like making kids feel understood, which is a good thing. Therefore, quotes from Skins, the 1975, Arctic Monkeys, Lorde start to make their way onto Tumblr because they're relatable and people think that those things are cool. So obviously it follows, right? Not to mention most of the kids who are taking part in this trend, and were on Tumblr in general, were probably depressed, anxious, had some other issues going on. And because they're teenagers and probably don't want to talk to their parents, just speaking from experience, they had nothing else to do but like romanticize those issues, which I have to assume most of us grew out of. I certainly did. I think that's where this trend starts. I'm not gonna shit on like romanticizing your issues too much, especially if you're a 15-year-old. Like, we do what we can to get by, and if you're a teenager, like, there's just no coping mechanisms in place yet. It's one of the first ones you go through, and like, it is what it is. It just so happened that a large group of girls went through it together. And I know a lot of the quotes that were popular at the time, like, now with the eyes of an adult, are like super surface level, not interesting, really silly, but like, that's fine. We all learn, we all grow, and like, if you were a kid, it sounded cool. They just sounded fun, and that's fine. Vinyl. Popularity of records has risen pretty steadily actually since 2007, but the peak of the vinyl resurgence was, interestingly enough, between 2012 and 2014, according to Wikipedia. I could be wrong, but that places us right in the sweet spot of like where this trend was. So, speaking from personal experience, when I was 15, I started collecting records because it was on Tumblr, because it was cool. And I still collect them. I haven't collected them in a little while just because I don't have the time to be doing that, but I still enjoy it, and I think it's a good thing that a lot of us got interested in it because it was like cool and edgy or whatever. I also found out that the store with the highest market share for vinyl sales in the US is Urban Outfitters. So I think that can kind of point to like the age group that was consuming vinyl at the time, people in their teens to 20s, which also were the people engaging in the black and white Tumblr trend. Streaming was just kind of starting to become a thing at this time, but the Spotify album section was like fucked up. Like, you couldn't save albums individually, so if you wanted to feel like you had an album collection, it made more sense to collect physical vinyl than it did to just do stuff on streaming. Now it's easier to like just go on streaming and have like a collection, even though it's not really a collection, it can be taken away at any time. That was the appeal, at least for me, and I think for others as well. The other important thing here is that vinyl is just good for taking pictures with, and that was kind of the point of it being there on Tumblr, was that it looked cool if you were holding it. So anything that had like a cool cover, obviously like AM or 975 self-titled, and sometimes you would get vinyl that had like, it was like clear or colored or something, and like, it was just fun. It's a fun hobby. I'm still totally for vinyl. Nature. I'm not exactly sure what this part of the trend was about, but there was like a significant emphasis on like the idea of escape, whether that be from like your parents or your small town. Maybe it's like a return to nature thing, but the images were normally paired with quotes, probably about escapism or something else. But yeah, I don't know if it was just like appealing to like, I don't know, go on a road trip and like get fucked up with your friends in the woods or something, but like, it was there, it was an idea people had. I also think the fact that it was so focused on like pine trees and fog and like all these other like edgy things was kind of like a leftover from the Twilight thing, but I can't prove that, so just a theory. Drugs. drugs were there. I'm really honestly not sure how many people who were on Tumblr actually did drugs. I didn't. Chances are if you were on Tumblr, you probably weren't actually that cool in real life and you were only cool online. But obviously people do drugs in high school in small groups or alone or whatever. I just don't know where teenagers get them, and like, I just can't imagine how many people were actually doing it. But I'm more than positive that the culture of Tumblr at the time like encouraged people to do drugs later, so it is what it is. It's not like the best part of black and white Tumblr, but it was there, so I'm not gonna ignore it. But like, be safe. So, what kinds of drugs were people on Tumblr talking about? What were the 15-year-olds interested in? Alcohol, specifically vodka. Weed, not as big as cigarettes, but it was there. It wasn't unusual to see like a marijuana leaf like pop up on your dash. Cocaine, big time, lots of that. It was mentioned in like every song that was popular at the time, which is like not great, but it was there. Like the Robbers video, which I mentioned as being like super popular at the time, was like about doing cocaine and robbing a store. Like I said, I don't know how many 15-year-olds are actually doing that. So pills, especially I think because so many kids were like on actual pills, like for either like depression or anxiety or like a learning disability of some sort. Like it was just there. I don't think kids were actually doing the pills they said they were doing. I think they were probably just taking Adderall for their ADD, but it's whatever. It was romanticized regardless. And finally, cigarettes. This is the biggest one. They were in like every fucking photo, every music video, every TV show. I don't know, every musical artist that was part of this movement was smoking in photos. Unless you were Lorde, who was a teenager whose label probably wouldn't let her do that. Even she would like mention smoking in her songs. It was just everywhere. Which is really weird in hindsight because I don't know that many people my age that smoke. If they do, it's like vaping or it's weed or whatever. Not that many people smoke cigarettes. So I don't know what happened to that. But maybe it just seemed cool. I guess like smoke looks good in photos. It looks cool with a leather jacket. Just aesthetically, it's kind of fun. I don't know. Nobody ended up taking it up. Which I think proves my theory that not that many people were actually doing what they said they were doing online. Which is probably a good thing, because everybody was 15 years old. Do whatever you want to now, just be safe about it. But like, if you're 15 years old, try not to. Go to school, do homework. So this one's also totally on the 1975, I think. Neon quotes were everywhere, like signs, or like maybe like a neon box with a quote inside, also totally the 1975. Now everyone uses neon all the fucking time, and it's like connected to like the 80s revival thing, which is not where it started. We had it first. But yeah, I don't know. It was around. It was there. I've already mentioned a bunch of artists, so I'm not gonna mention more right now, but I can't stress enough how this was like what made the trend exist. Like, what made Tumblr what it was, aesthetically, was music. A bunch of hot British dudes came along, and it made girls lose their minds, and they wanted to emulate what they saw, and they did. That's what this is. If I could boil this video down to anything, that's what the trend was. It is, looking back, a bit strange how some of these artists don't really sound that much alike. Like, if you put on an Arctic Monkeys song, and you put on a Neighborhood song, they don't sound that much alike at all, actually, aside from being, like, moody and having lyrics about, like, being depressed. It doesn't necessarily follow that you would like both, especially because, controversial, Arctic Monkeys are so much better than The Neighborhood. So, yeah, it was just, like, all the same, like, black and white vibe. So that's what people just used as their aesthetic. I don't know if labels were making them do that, like if one person started to do it, specifically I guess the 1975 because they came first. If they did it and then all the labels were like, no, you have to do black and white. I don't know. But it was so common at the time that like any artist that did it just became part of this club on Tumblr. It is, however, really shitty that some genres were ignored because similar aesthetics were happening in hip-hop at the same time. Like you have like A$AP Rocky, Earl Sweatshirt, doing the same thing at the same time, but nobody fucking talked about them because they all wanted to focus on like white dudes, and that's just Tumblr. It was also really male focused. I know I said Lorde and Lana were like part of this, but they were nowhere near as popular as Arctic Monkeys or the 1975. Like you had like Charlie XCX out in the corner, like incorporating Tumblr aesthetics into like everything she did, and she wasn't even that popular on Tumblr. Same with The Weeknd, using these aesthetics intentionally in everything that he did. I don't know. It was really selective, and really focused, like I said, on like really specific looking white dudes. And it's all good music. I'm not gonna shit on any of it, except for The Neighborhood, kind of. But we could have diversified a little bit. Guys, we could have. Blurriness. So personal theory, I think this is because nobody knew how to take a fucking photo. I would say it's supposed to represent confusion, intoxication, whatever. But I don't think so. I think people just started posting shitty photos and were like, hey, look what I did. And people were like, oh, that looks good. And then they went and took another shitty photo. So I think this is by far the most problematic bit. So I'm gonna just dive into that. Every girl in there looked like me, which is white, skinny, conventional looking. I'm not ugly, obviously. You can see me. That's all that got reblogged, which is really shitty because at the time, I followed like a bunch of girls of color on Tumblr, and they would bring up like, hey, we don't feel represented in what's happening here, like why are we all just reblogging pictures of like skinny white girls, like what's going on? But I didn't see a lot of change, unfortunately. Things are obviously a lot different now. I think there's been more of a concentrated effort to be inclusive of different body sizes, of different races, different looks, but like, we could have done a lot better at the time. I don't see why not. Also, the fashion was sort of hard to obtain if you couldn't afford it. Docs were like you had to wear Docs. Like it was specifically Doc Martens. Like you couldn't just wear boots. It was Docs. And that's obviously like Docs are like 150 bucks if you want like good Docs. So it was a brand thing. Leather jackets, expensive. Even if you get one secondhand, expensive. So I have to assume the kids that were able to achieve the style, like me at the time, come from like fortunate families, which sort of makes some of the apathy like a bit less sympathetic, but whatever. That aside, I still dress like that half the time. Today I'm in green, but it's just kind of a nice look, honestly. I think black looks good on everybody, like no matter what you look like, everybody can pull that off. I know specifically here it was like skinny jeans and like, you know, tight fitting skirts, and that's not great. We could have obviously diversified that as well. But it looks good on me, so I still wear it. Like, I don't really feel like any of the pieces that were popular will really ever go out of date, because it is just appropriating grunge aesthetics, like the leather jacket, you know, the ripped jeans, whatever. Like, those never really go out. So I guess that was a good thing we did, that we just picked fashion that never goes out of style, so it'll just be cool forever. We definitely could have fit some other styles in to include more people. So that's just my take on that. Gifts. Kids don't really use GIFs anymore, do they? I feel like GIFs are a really millennial thing. If I see somebody using a GIF on Twitter, I just assume they're older than me. So it's pretty dated, and the quotes that were on them are like obviously super cringy. But it's kind of nostalgic now because they're all really glitchy and pixelated. If you go on Tumblr and search just like black and white GIFs, a lot of the old ones will still pop up, and they look bad. But it's a sort of bad that like dates it to a certain period of time and makes it like just kind of nostalgic and nice. Alright, finally, depression. Why were we all so sad, guys? I've been trying to figure that out like all day before filming this video. Like, I spent so much time looking up what happened in 2013 or 2012 that would have made people like disenfranchised, and there's not a lot. Like, Obama got re-elected. What happened to us? What happened? I don't know. All I can think of is that most kids are like sad, and that's just something people go through. And we happened at this time to have a bunch of artists that released sad music, and we latched onto it. We made it our thing. And I think that's cool. I know it's maybe not cool to reflect on like being sad and being like, oh, those were good times, but they were kind of good times. Like, it's more fun to suffer together than alone. And Tumblr is a great place for doing that. Like, I think every teen, unless they're like super normal, I guess, and have like no issues, goes through a period of time where they feel like, ugh, like, why do my parents not understand me? Why does school suck so bad? Why do I have fights with my friends over stupid things that make no sense? Why do I feel like the future is super uncertain and I have no idea what I'm doing with my life? And I think that, you know, all this sort of spoke to that, regardless of, you know, the fact that it was made by a bunch of dudes in their mid-20s, minus Lord, I guess. We liked it. And I don't really see an issue with that. It is, I've seen people say, like, in hindsight that it's sort of, like, embarrassing. I don't think it is. I think it's one of the cooler trends you could have potentially been involved in. Especially when Tumblr had, like, Super Hulock and, like, the other weird shit that I was sort of involved in as well. Like, that was the cooler thing that I liked. You could be a lot worse off, is what I'm getting at. And I think everybody grew up to be, like, pretty normal adults. I would consider myself pretty normal. Like, I have my shit together. So, I mean, nobody really has their shit together right now because of everything that's happening, but like, in terms of what I could be doing right now, I think I'm fine. So even though it was sort of edgy, I think it was good, mostly. That's my take on what the black and white Tumblr movement was, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed this either walk down memory lane or this history lesson or whatever. And I'll see you next time.